Hello, so we start this semester, we're at the chapter of review, and first thing we're going to see is section 0.1, which is a review about the arithmetic that's done with integers. So what are integers? Imagine this is a line on which I'm going to display some numbers, so right in the middle here is 0, and then 1 unit to the right is number 1, number 2. So you've probably seen this, right? Now those are called whole numbers, which we sometimes refer to in French as les naturels. And then the opposite of whole numbers form the negative numbers. So here we have the opposite of whole numbers, and those are, well, -1, -2, -3, and so on. Okay, so we can think of something like 3 as start at 0 and move 3 units to the right, and -3 start at 0, move 3 units to the left, or -3 is just the opposite of 3. We could also say that the opposite of -3, so if I'm here, the opposite of that number, so that's kind of like doing a reflection across the number 0, across the origin, and that gives us 3. So in some way, it makes sense to say that -3, so the opposite of -3. So the minus, you can think of it as the opposite. It moves you across the origin. So if you're here, the opposite of 4 is -4, but the opposite of -3 is 3, so we're moving across the origin. So the opposite of -3 is 3. So let's do some maybe addition and subtraction. Okay. Of course, I can add two negative numbers. Now, this looks awkward because I've got a plus and a negative sign. So if I really mean plus the number -3, usually I'm going to put that in brackets so that it really stands out as the addition of two numbers. So this is -5 plus -3. You can think of that as, okay, start at the origin. -5 moves you 5 units to the left, and -3 move 3 units to the left some more. So that's going to move us 8 units to the left. So we're going to end up at -8. If I do -7 plus 2, so that's go 7 units to the left. So with that gets us to -7. Then 2 units to the right. So we're going to be a little more to the right than -7. So we're going to be at -5. Of course, this is the same as 2 plus -7, because we move 2 units to the right and then 7 units to the left. We end up 5 units to the left, so at -5. If I write something like 2 minus 7, okay, I can interpret the subtraction of from an integer 2. If I subtract a number that's a little larger than 2, so 7, well, that makes sense if I think of that in terms of an addition. So we can think of subtractions as being addition. When you're subtracting 7, you're adding the opposite of 7. That's the exact same thing. And then we end up at -5. If I do something like 2 minus -3, so this is the same as 2, to which I'm adding the, okay, let's put that in brackets because I'm going to put a negative sign there. I'm going to be adding the opposite of -3. Well, what's the opposite of -3? We said that, remember, this is actually 3. So this is the same as 2 plus 3. So you might have seen that 2 negatives gives you a positive. Well, that's the reason why. Then we end up with 5. Okay, and now multiplication and division. How does that go? If I do 2 multiplied by -3, in this course, when we're going to multiply, usually we won't put any, when there's nothing in between the numbers, it means it's a multiplication. So 2 bracket -3, that's the exact same thing as 2 times -3. So this is a notation that I'm using here. Okay, to write, so I'm sort of omitting the multiplication by, and if I omit it, it's just the same as a multiplication. So what is that? 2 times -3. So, well, that's the same. That would be the same as if I do 2 times something. It's as if I'm adding twice the same number. So that's -3 plus -3. So that's -6. So in some way we can see that if I do 2 times -3, that's exactly the same thing as doing 2 times 3 first, and then taking the opposite of that. So in some way, this negative sign here, I can move it in front like that. Okay, so this is something we'll often do if we have like many numbers that are multiplied together. We're going to count how many negative signs there are. We're going to move that in front, and if it's a odd number of negative signs, it just stays a minus sign, and if it's an even number of negative sign, then it becomes a plus sign. Okay, so for example, if I write -2 times -3, you see I can move this negative sign in front. So now I have minus 2 times 3. So that's usually something I'll do in my head. As you can see, there are 2 negative signs. That gives me just a plus sign, right? The opposite of the opposite is just the number itself. So it's just 2 times 3, 6. So usually we will only write those steps here. We'll immediately count, oh, there are 2 negative signs multiplied together, 2 negative numbers multiplied together gives us a positive number. So we will omit this part here. Usually we won't write it down. Okay, what else? Well, maybe as a rule, you might want to remember, if I add a positive number, if I multiply a positive number with a negative number, I will end up with a negative. Same goes if I do a negative times a positive number, still end up with a negative. 2 negatives, well, the opposite of the opposite, that is going to be a positive number. And a positive times a positive, well, that's also a positive number. Okay. Fractions. Well, actually, let's not even write fractions. Remember, this section is about addition, multiplication, and division. So I'm doing division now. So minus 36 over 9. So we do end up with a fraction as we divide. What does that mean? Okay, if I do this, normally I'll say, oh, this is the opposite of 36 over 9. So I will take care of 36 and 9 and then deal with the minus sign later. So 36 divided by 9, that's 4. So this is going to be the opposite of 4, so minus 4. If I have minus 36 over minus 9, well, let's do it slowly here. Those are steps I wouldn't write. This would be the opposite of 36 over minus 9. But that's also the opposite of the opposite of 36 over 9. So as you can see, I have 2 negative signs. So that's just the same as a positive. So I just get 36 over 9, which is 4. So again here, if I have 2 negatives divided by, then we'll just end up with something that's positive. So once again, this part, normally I wouldn't write it. Okay, I would do that in my head. Just cancel off the negative signs. So in some way, a negative over a negative gives you a positive. So we can write those rules down. So rule, if I have a negative divided by a positive, that's going to give me a negative. A positive over a negative, that's also a negative. A positive over a positive, that's a positive. And a negative divided by a negative, that's a positive. Okay, those rules, they make a lot of sense, okay, because those are the exact same rules as before. If you see this positive, if I send on the other side here, right, for example, you know, if I have think about this, let's say I have minus 4 over 4, okay, minus 9 over 4, that's going to give me a negative number. In fact, it's going to give me what, minus 2.25. Okay. If I multiply both sides by 4, okay, 4 over 4 will give me 1. So what I'll end up with is minus 9 is minus 2.25 times 4. So I end up with a rule, something that I saw as a rule for multiplication. I have a negative here times the positive gives me a negative. So all these rules, those are the exact same rules we saw before in terms of multiplication. So this first rule, if I move the plus sign across, will just tell me that negative times a positive gives me a negative. If I send this one across, it will tell me that a positive is obtained by doing a negative times a negative. This one just says a positive is a positive times a positive. This says a negative is a positive times a negative. So those are just multiplication rules written differently. And maybe to end this little section, a final warning, something to watch out for. It's the following thing. If I write 3 plus minus 7, well, that's move 3 to the right and then 7 to the left. That gives me minus 4. Okay, so this is the same thing as moving 4 to the left. But if I write 3 times minus 7, okay, because I have brackets now, it's because in between those numbers there's a little multiplication sign hiding. So this is really a multiplication. So this is minus 21. And this is a mistake I often see. Students, when they see something like this, they will just ignore the brackets and say, oh, that's just the same as 3 minus 7. Actually not. Okay, this is not at all the same thing. Because I've put brackets now, it forces me to do a multiplication. It's as if I've got minus 7 that stands next to 3. If there's nothing in between them, it's because they're multiplied.